defer to my experts, Ms. Xiomara Ford, who's my Cyber Division Chief at Software Engineering Center, and Mr. Chad Claussen, who's my Chief Engineer. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do, why do we care about cyber, why is this a big deal to us, and then they're going to step you through some of the things we're doing to try to secure software and our C4ISR systems, and then we will have a lot of time for question and answer if you guys have questions. So who are we? We are a software center under Communications and Electronics Command, CECOM, which is under AMC. And our mission really is software sustainment for C4ISR systems. So and I'm going to talk a little bit about our customers on another chart, but as the PEOs develop systems that they start to field, there comes a time when they transition over to sustainment. For software, it's usually a year after the initial operating capability, so a year after fielding starts. We will take the software, and we are funded from Army G4 to do sustainment from there on. So we work very closely with the PEOs in doing that. I mean, we don't do it on our own. From a prioritization perspective, we work with the PEOs and with TRADOC to prioritize, okay, we have this much money. These are the things that we're going to fix, and we do that annually with all of our systems. So primarily what we do is we fix issues that are reported by soldiers. So, as systems field, we can never test software enough. We know that. So as systems field, we find problems. They get reported, and they get prioritized. And if they make it above the money cut line, we fix them. We maintain interoperability with systems. So especially in the C4ISR world, we use a lot of standards to communicate, right? So like VMF, for example. Lots of systems use VMF to talk to each other. Well, that standard changes every year or every couple of years, so these systems have to be updated to maintain interoperability with the standard so they can continue talking to each other. The biggest thing we probably do is cyber readiness. So there are always cyber issues that we find. Primarily, there's two areas. There's commercial off-the-shelf products that we use in all of our C4ISR systems that we already know they're vulnerable, and we continue to find vulnerabilities. I mean, if I can buy it, so can the bad guy, and so can the hackers, right? And so those are things that we try to stay on top of that Chad in particular is going to talk to you about what we're trying to do to make our patching faster and more effective. And then there's, of course, issues on the government-developed code as well, and Xiomara is going to talk to you a little bit about what we do in that arena. So that's kind of a nutshell of what we do. So who do we support? We support all C4ISR systems. Primarily, those are all systems coming out of PEO EIS, PEO IWNS, and PEO C3T. So right now, and don't quote me, but I'm going to say we have something in like 110 systems in software sustainment at SEC, and they come mostly from these PEOs. We have a few that come from like PEO Aviation, and there's justification for that because they're systems that communicate with the ground C4ISR systems. So in order to maintain interoperability, those are in our portfolio, but primarily this is what we support. So why do we care about cybersecurity? Well, I said it a little bit earlier, but really anything on the network can be hacked, and we all know that. And so the systems we're supporting are on a tactical network. And even though many of them are on SIPR that already has a layer of security, we know that there are issues. We know that it can be infiltrated. And so we have to do the very best we can to secure the systems on the network. So, I would tell you commercial off-the-shelf products are probably our biggest vulnerability area because they're available to everybody and because we know that there's, all kinds of doors and windows through them. So we spend a lot of our time at SCC doing patches for those systems. We used to only patch quarterly. Now, most of our systems, we patch monthly. Chad's going to talk to you about electronic patching. When we get there, we're really trying to push the community to get there faster. We will be able to patch more frequently than monthly. It's right now one of the limiting factors is, we're still sending out like CDs and DVDs with patches, and we got to send those everywhere globally. So that takes time. So we're not as up to date as we should be. So, we're working really hard to try to get past that and get to some kind of network type of mechanism so that we can do that more effectively. But that's really, I think of all of the areas that we are focused on in SEC, cybersecurity is the biggest because it's not going to go away. Every company, right? Target, Equifax, or was it Experian, whatever. All these OPM, they all got hacked. All our information's out there. Everybody's got your credit card information. And it's no different on the tactical network. We have information that is critical to the bad guy. They want to know where we are. They want to know what we're saying. They want to know where we're going. They want to know what our op plan is. So, we have to be able to protect that. And the only way to do that is to make sure that we're on top of cybersecurity for all of these systems. So, I think that was my last chart. So, you're up next. Yep. And, we'll finish, like I said, and then we can certainly entertain any questions.
Hi, good afternoon. Again, my name is Xiomara. I'm the Cybersecurity Division Chief for CECOM SEC. So basically, this chart right here that you see, this is a very high-level view of how the Software Engineering Center is implementing improvements with cybersecurity. We'll get into more details of this on the next couple of charts. But basically, right now, our objective is to train professionals to become cybersecurity experts so that they can effectively execute the cybersecurity requirements across the center. Right now, we are leveraging some capabilities with regards to the direct hiring authority, trying to recruit and retain cybersecurity professionals with the direct hiring authority that was authorized by OPM. We've got a cyber workforce program that targets on identifying cyber functions across the center and then developing training roadmaps and plans on how we can enhance and build those skill sets across the center. The next one is how we are assessing the Army and the enterprise software for security deficiencies. And then the e-patching capability, which Chad will get into later on in the couple of slides. The other capability that we will also discuss is our capability of actually being able to see security vulnerabilities as we're actually doing software development. So the Cyber Workforce Program. So for us to be able to effectively execute our cybersecurity requirements, we have to have professionals that understand what those requirements are. And that's an area right now that I will tell you that the federal and the private sectors are currently struggling with. So as a result of that, we established a program at SEC to start implementing the Federal Cybersecurity Workforce Assessment Act of 2015, which is really part of the workforce planning, and then also identifying all the critical cybersecurity skill sets and the gaps so that we can educate, train, and build those skills within the Software Engineering Center for all of the functions that we do. So we're not just looking at it from an ATO perspective. We look at it from the requirements to the procurement to the implementation, operations, and decommissioning phases of these systems. With that stated, what we have done is that we have coded the personnel within the Army training and certification tracking system with the cyber codes of functions that they would be responsible for to give them situational awareness of what their cyber responsibilities are. And then we've also established training roadmaps on the job training. We've provided resources, training opportunities on this portal site so that the personnel are aware of upcoming opportunities that they can participate in to enhance and build those skill sets. Our end state really is to develop an innovative recruitment and retainment strategy. That's right now a struggle for us is not just bringing on qualified cybersecurity professionals, but holding on to them. So we are trying to look at unique ways on how we can do that across the center. We also include into our program cyber threat briefings. So these threat briefings are coordinated with the G2, and it's basically giving them situational awareness of current threats on intel, when it comes to software applications and also operations. So that also influences our development approach and how we're securing our software. And then lastly, we want to promote a greater sense of cybersecurity responsibilities across the center. So it's not just your traditional cybersecurity professionals, but it would be anybody from the administrative assistants that should be OPSEC, should be very knowledgeable in OPSEC type operations, cybersecurity requirements, protecting data while we're doing the operation. To also our developers, to make sure that they understand secure coding and things of that nature. So next, our software assurance program. So one of the things I will tell you with our software assurance programs is, a lot of our systems go through the risk management framework. A lot of times the core capabilities of these systems is the actual GOTS applications that are developed for it. And unfortunately, the enterprise tools that DISA provides, ACAS, NESAS, they don't look at that level of the details of the security issues with those actual applications. So our software assurance program basically entails professionals that are not just expertise in software development, but also with cybersecurity, that actually conduct an analysis of the software code, and they provide a report to the system owners on what the issues were and what they recommend and how they should fix it. The other thing that we have the capability of doing is aligning those findings to the RMF requirements. Right now, for the STIG checklist that the ISOs have to use for assessing the security posture of these systems is generally done via an interview process. So we want to be able to actually automate that through using valid tools and actually providing the information that supports, the compliancy status of those requirements. In addition to that, we also have developed capabilities on our development networks where the developers actually have tools available to them, so for them to be able to do actual real-time assessments of their software as they're actually developing. The personnel that we have that are actually doing this, like I said, it's a very hard skill set to find a software developer that also understands cybersecurity. So our goal with this really, like I said, is to provide the tools, educate our workforce so that we can start securing the software, providing that defense in depth approach with our operations, and then giving, of course, the warfighter the level of assurance that the software is actually free of vulnerabilities and then it's going to do its job, out in the field. Our next stage, so what we'd like to do actually with this, our long-term goal is that we really like to get involved earlier into the acquisition life cycle. We want to do assessments, when they're actually doing the development. This, I think, it will save the Army tons of money, because what we're doing right now is, we're looking at the software before it comes into sustainment, and once you find these issues to fix them, sometimes it takes a lot of time and a lot of resources to do. So we really want to get involved in the actual acquisition process so that we can catch the issues up front, fix them, and then move it on to sustainment. So with that stated, we're going to hold questions for, okay.
Yeah.
So we'll hold the questions until after Chad briefs his piece of it. Thank you.
Good afternoon. So I'm Chad Claussen, the Chief Technical Officer for SEC. So I'm going to talk a little bit about electronic patching. So as Xiomara talked about, the software assurance development program that is being implemented in SEC. So we're trying to secure the software before it gets out in the field, but we know once it gets into the field, vulnerabilities are found. So really, how do we address those, and what's the scope of electronic patching? So it's more than just applying the patches. So you've got to identify what the patch is. You've got to assess your systems to see if they're vulnerable to those patches. You've got to deliver the patches out to the field. And then you've got to have that compliance reporting mechanism as well, so you understand what state your systems are at. So, and that's a challenge today with the warfighting systems, because when you do a scan on a system with ACAS, the tool that's out there today, it's going to give you every vulnerability known to those systems, and most of them it'll tell you, hey, it's a Microsoft operating system or Java or what have you, and here are all the open vulnerabilities. Well, with the POR systems, what we have to do is we have to test the patches that are going on there and make sure it doesn't reduce or take away some of the functionality of the system. So just because a scanning tool says you have all these open vulnerabilities doesn't mean you should necessarily apply all of them, because you could break something else. but we've got to find mitigation strategies for them. So the scope of this is larger than just applying a patch. So how we do this today is typically, as Ms. Zbozny said, the process is a little archaic for most of the systems. We get the patches, we identify them, we test them in the labs, we put them on CDs or DVDs, we mail them out to the field, which is crazy, right? It's 2018. So we've got to find a way to fix that process. And we also have to look at how do we assess the specific vulnerabilities of those PORs so the warfighters know what is the true state of my system from a vulnerability perspective, not just what industry is telling me based on the open vulnerabilities they have, which we can patch at home or in our businesses, which won't have a big impact on us. So that's really the process today. It's very slow. We're trying to get to the point where we can deliver the patches electronically. We're trying to get to the point where we can do true assessments for compliance and say, here's your true status of your warfighting system, not the scanner said you have all these open vulnerabilities, apply all the patches, and potentially break a functionality in those systems. So that's really the end state. We want to make this a seamless process for the soldier. We want to make sure we're distributing the patches as quickly and as efficiently as we can. So that's really the end state for this effort. So I'll get into a little bit of how we're doing this or what our approach is to solve these problems. So there's 4 lines of effort that we're looking at. So the first one is system tagging. So again, you do a scan or you do asset management or asset discovery on your network, you're going to get, I'm a Microsoft operating system, I have Adobe this, I have Java that, but you don't know what that POR system is. So the first step is to tag those systems so that when those scanners go out, they say, oh, that's a DSIG system, or that's a CPOF system, or that's whatever other warfighting system is. Because that'll give you the context of what I should be measuring against. So that's the first step. The second step is a tool that's in development today, which will give you that true compliance reporting. So you have your scanner out there that goes out and says, hey, here are all these open vulnerabilities on your system. You have the systems with the tag embedded in them. Well, now we're developing a tool that will take the scan results, the tags, and say, okay, I know this system is a DSIGS. I'm going to pull down what that baseline should be from a cybersecurity perspective. I'm going to take the scan results, correlate those, and say, here's my true status of this DSIG system. So I'm uncompliant or I'm not compliant with these patches, I need to update those. Not the list of 100 or so that they're going to tell you from an industry perspective. And there's reasons why we can't apply all those patches. You don't want to reduce functionality or break functionality of the system. So I think that's a huge capability that will give the warfighter the ability to say, hey, this is what I look like. Because right today, the reports coming out of ACAS, they get sent up to our cyber, and our cyber will look at them like, oh my gosh, you guys aren't compliant. Look at all these open vulnerabilities. But it doesn't give the context behind why we're not compliant against those vulnerabilities. So those are the first 2 lines of effort, and they're kind of linked together. The next 2 I'll talk about aren't so we can decouple those and we can take this in a phased approach. So the e-patching itself. So once we know what the vulnerability is, once we know the status of our system, how do we actually apply the patch? So instead of today, most systems, we're manually applying those. So we're putting CDs in, we're putting DVDs in, and we're manually updating those. So now the concept is we have, and those of you that have been in the field and know these systems know there's Microsoft Security or System Center Configuration Manager, SCCM. So that system can automate and push the patches. But it's not that great in a tactical environment. So when you have low bandwidth environment and when you're really outside of the command post and trying to push those out, it's very difficult. So there are tools in place today. What this effort is doing is taking advantage of the existing tools, but also looking into the future. So what are those other tools out there today, or do we have to develop tools or plugins to existing tools to make it more tactical friendly? So that's what that 3rd line of effort is, to actually apply the patches in a tactical environment as seamlessly as possible for the warfighter. And the last line of effort is the patch portal. So we talked about DVDs, mailing DVDs out or mailing hard disks out. So the last one is really how can we get to the point where we post the patches to a portal, the units have the ability to pull those patches down instead of waiting the weeks upon weeks to pull them down. That way, as soon as they're up there, the units have the ability to pull them down and they can get their cyber posture up to date as quickly as possible. And hopefully those e-patching tools are in place to push those out in an automated fashion and not have to manually update those. So those are the 4 lines of effort and how we're trying to get after this problem. It's a big problem. There are lots of pieces. And again, this isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, and it's not everything has to be done at once. We're trying to take incremental steps, and there are patches out there we currently have a patch portal out there with some system posted, so we can kind of check that off and say we've got an early win there. There is an existing e-patching solution out there for some systems, which that's goodness, but we want to expand on that. The tagging and the compliance reporting, that should be coming very soon, probably in the next 6 to 12 months. So we're making incremental strides to get there, but this isn't hey, we've got to have everything to claim success. We want to take the steps necessary as we move along. So my last chart is I talk we a lot. So we isn't just CECOM and SEC. So there are a lot of organizations involved in this, a lot of organizations that have stake in the process. And just listing a few of them there is sustainment side of the house, you've got AMC, CECOM, SEC that we're responsible for doing the patching, the tagging on the systems in sustainment. You've got ASALT, who are the material developers who are responsible for doing the same patching and tagging for systems as they're developing them. And also looking forward to what is that next e-patching solution? What should the quote-unquote tactical solution be that SCCM can't fill the gap today? You've got our cyber involved from a cyber perspective in general, but more specifically looking at the compliance reporting piece of it. So what does right look like? How do we need to report it back up to them to make sure that they have the information that they need? We've got TRADOC involved to make sure that as we're developing these solutions and we're learning lessons, that they're building these into the future requirements for the current systems that are in sustainment. And then FORCECOM, they've been a great partner to get the stuff into the field, get early feedback from the operational units, and help develop TTPs and get the word out to everybody. Hey, these capabilities are out there, because that's one of the challenges we have. We have some systems that have the capability today, but units just don't know about it. So it's getting the word out and putting the proper emphasis on it. So that's e-patching in a nutshell. So I think now we can open it up for questions if anybody has any questions.
Go ahead.
Okay. First question is, right now you're doing the minimum requirements for self-development, which is static and dynamic code analysis. How are you dealing with the component libraries of them? Namely, if you go back about a year ago, get struts off. Are you managing your libraries in order to software to identify which library is security? Like Git or Sonatype or those.
Right. So that's an initiative that we're not at quite yet, but we have thought about it. We do want to do on the libraries themselves an analysis where we can actually post those particular libraries that we've already assessed and kind of make it available to the community to say, hey, we've already looked at this. That's the goal, but we're not there quite yet.
Hi, John Purvius, Market Lead for Agility in Aberdeen. So two questions. On the electronic patching, we understand in the tactical networks environment, the RPS application has shown some promise as a viable patching tool. Can you talk a little bit about the attributes of RPS and why it has shown some progress relative to SCCM, and if that's something that may be applicable with other programs of record? And then secondly, getting involved early on in the acquisition phase, that's something that our teams think is really important, ensuring that the code is resilient. There are all types of downstream costs that are involved as well. And I know, Jen, I think you had talked about an acquisition lifecycle cell that you were standing up to look at this problem. So can you talk a little bit more about where we are in having broad-based stakeholder support for that across the POs and the SEC? Because we've seen that work really well with some programs of record and less so with other POs.
Okay, so you had like 3 questions. So I think the first one was RPS, which I'll let Chad address, and you might have to remind me about the other 2.
So yeah, RPS is a solution that PM Tactical Networks has put in the field for provisioning. So when I say provisioning, it's loading the systems, configuring the systems. There is a patching component to RPS that the SDK just came out earlier this year. So that hasn't been fielded yet, but it is being looked at amongst other systems as well. So Puppet is one that IEWNS is using. currently in some of their implementations, which is being looked at as an alternative to SCCM as well. So some of the attributes of RPS, so really they have a content distribution network, a mechanism that they push the files and the patches and the configurations around. That was one of the reasons that I believe Tactical Networks chose that, and it's suitable for the Tactical Network. And really, RPS is a framework. It's not an application. It's not a solution. So it's a Microsoft. They're building it based on their existing technologies and tweaking things, right? So PM Tactical Networks and PM Mission Command under POC3T have been working with Microsoft for probably the last Tactical Networks more over the past probably year and a half, 2 years, customizing the implementation specific to the tactical environment. So really they're looking at how do we most efficiently and effectively push the content around, because I'll contend with electronic patching, it's the content distribution that's going to kill us. I mean, especially when you talk about a tactical network. As the pipes get smaller and smaller, lower and lower in the echelons, it's the size of the patches aren't changing, right? So we've got to look at it in two-pronged approaches. How do we make those patches a little less bulky, and how do we find mechanisms to push those around more efficiently and effectively around the network? So that, I hope that answered your RPS question.
Yeah, and just to kind of tag on to that, we at SEC, we're working very closely with the PMs and PEOs, but what we don't want to do is go down the path of 10 different solutions, right? And so we're really looking to ASALT, SOCI to help bridge that gap. Right now, pretty much all of C3T is on board with RPS, so that's great. So as long as we continue down that path and RPS is proven out to work, then I think it is, like Chad said, designed for the tactical environment, which is going to be a difficult thing to fulfill. We know SCCM is what we've got today, and we're using it, but it doesn't scale. So as we start pushing every patch out there and trying to push them from like the motherland or some home station place over the network to wherever our units are, it's not going to scale. So that's the gap we're trying to solve. I think you had a question about acquisition lifecycle.
Yeah, the lifecycle cell. Just where are you in getting broad-based support for that? And as a contractor, oftentimes it's difficult to be involved with that. The PM staff says, look, that's our job right now. We're putting together the transition plan, but we'd like to be involved because ultimately we end up having to sustain that software.
So there's a couple of different initiatives that are in place really already at CECOM that I can talk to you about. One is actually called the Acquisition Lifecycle Cell, the ALCC. It is a cell that directly supports the CG and DCG, and essentially what that group of people does is work very closely with the PEO and PM community to make sure that as programs are even not just transitioning in, but we're really starting to look as programs are at milestone A, like you're thinking about something. What is it that we need to put in place to make sure that sustainment is going to be cost effective, in general, as you build that program? So we get involved, they help us to get involved, and then our folks, mine and Liz's folks, get involved with the PMs to try to help them shape what that looks like. They staff all the documents through, ACT strategies, all that stuff we see now that we didn't see before. The PMs we're trying to push long contracts, which I'm sure you've heard from the ACC. So, the days of 1, 2, 3-year contracts, like I hope I never see them again, because it is very painful on all sides. I mean, we're recompeting work. We award a contract, we're already starting the new competition because contract's going to expire. It's crazy. And as part of that, we're trying to leverage PM contracts for at least a little while. So let them put sustainment considerations in their contracts so that when it transitions, we don't have this big gap, or we're not, running to recompete. We can leverage what they've got for a little bit as we get our plan in place, and I think that's a more effective way to do it. So that's one aspect. The other is the transition to sustainment cell, which we were actually leading, we SEC were leading, but we're now transitioning it to the ALCC because it makes sense for them to do it. And it's really putting a process in place for CECOM in terms of as we get ready for transition, what should we be doing? What is the timeline 3 years out from transition? What are the things that you should have in place? What are the things that your people should know they're working with the PMs and PEOs on? 2 years out, 1 year out, et cetera. We already have processes with each PEO. We have MOAs that have been signed by the PEO and the CG for their specific systems. This one is really kind of informing our own people. What should our folks be looking for so that we can make sure we have all our ducks in a row?
So I think you had mentioned earlier that really SCC's focus is on sustainment, and then Xiomara mentioned that you're looking to get involved with PEOs so up front for the design part, but when you're stuck with a system that's already out there that was not properly designed for security, what flexibility does SCC have in, I'll say, restructuring that software? Or is it something you have to then go back to the PMs and PEOs to have it put in such a way that you can better secure?
No, so let me clarify a little bit about our involvement early on, and then I'll answer your question. So we have a lot of reimbursable support to PMs. So it's not really fair to say that we have no involvement. We do have people that are involved, usually early on, and can help to drive the design. I'm not sure that we always succeed in doing that. I think we're getting better at it, but I would tell you a lot of stuff we have right now is old. I mean, it's stuff that was developed 15, 20 years ago. So back then, yeah, probably not so much. So I think we are getting better in that arena right now. I have a great example with DSIG. So the initial version, I want to say it was, don't ask me the version number, I'll make it up. But it was a version that was out in the field that was failing CCRIs left and right. I mean, they were getting horrible scores. And so we always will work with the PM, but we don't have to go back to the PM to have them do something to let us do what we need to do. So we will always, the PM is part of the CCB, and even though the money comes directly to us, they help us to spend it. I mean, we're not just going to go off and do whatever we think. We're always coordinating. But in the case of DSIGs, there were a lot of structural issues. I mean, it wasn't like you could just patch it. It really needed kind of I'll say, somewhat of a drastic upheaval, especially in the COTS arena, because there were a lot of COTS products that were just end of life. And, as you change out these COTS products, it's not like you could just pop it back in. Now you've changed the interfaces to other things. So there was a lot of stuff that needed to be done, and we did it. I'm proud to say their CCRI score got a lot better after that. I would like not to have to do that. I will say that, because it costs a lot of money. So, I want to figure out, as we work with PMs to develop, and so much of the systems now are 100% software-based. I mean, there's really no hardware associated with a lot of these systems because they're just going to ride on whatever server's out there. So we're trying to figure out how we design them so that we can maintain cybersecurity in a more dynamic fashion than, hard-coding everything, and then it takes, a whole bunch of people to try to figure out how to unscrew that.
So where do you see SEC's responsibility as opposed to the PM's responsibility in ensuring that there is one baseline version, or I shouldn't use the word baseline, but one version of software out in the field? D6 brought it up as a great example of several different versions or iterations of software that's out there, which makes it much harder for SEC to properly secure the different versions and so forth. So there's I'm sure some tug and pull there, but where do you see the responsibility lying in terms of?
So what I would tell you is we work very closely with the PMs. I was at C3T when we did the software baseline reduction. There was a lot of room to reduce, right? Because in some cases there, we had 20 versions of DDS out there, and we had 15 versions of CPOF, and that was nuts. I mean, that was clearly a time of zero discipline. You know, everybody's just fielding the latest and greatest, and we can never field it to everybody before the next one comes. So you end up with, you know, a whole bunch of different software versions, which are bad on many levels. Not only do they cost a lot more to sustain, but they also impair interoperability. They add training burden. I mean, there's like nothing good about it. So that's not what we want to do. I'll stick up for DSIGs a little bit because they have a challenge in terms of being able, I don't think you're ever going to get to one version. That's the bottom line of anything. I think 2 or 3 is probably more realistic. So, and DSIGs is close. What I didn't understand about DSIGs until I went to SCC, because I was on the tactical network side, is that they really have, we call it DSIGs, but it's like entirely different programs under that umbrella. So it's not like you're ever going to field the version of DSIGs that's in the command post to the fixed sites. You're not, because they have different requirements, right? And there's all these different things under that DSIGs umbrella, but they're like completely different systems. So in fairness to DSIGs, and there's still room for improvement, I know that, but in fairness to DSIGs, I think you have to kind of like categorize what can you ever really get to one version or 2 versions on, and it's, I think, different components of DSIGs can get there. They are doing better, but there is still room for improvement. I know they are trying very hard, and we are working with them. So there's nothing we're developing that they're not aware of and have a plan to field, right? So the days of SEC going and doing something and the PM going and doing something different and everybody fields their stuff, those days are long gone. So everything we're doing in concert with them. But you have to remember also that fielding the Army takes a long time, even software. And so my dream is one day, when Chad finally gets his electronic patching thing fixed, that we're going to have I'm just kidding. That's like the hardest thing ever, because all those stakeholders, we don't control it. So we just try to bring everybody together, but it's hard. But one day we're going to have a way to push software out through a network. And that will make fielding a lot easier, right? But today, largely, you have fielding teams that have to go out and touch everything. And the other piece is training. So that part, we're probably always going to have to do some Delta training until we make everything as easy to operate as an iPhone, which we're a little ways away from. So anyway, that was a long answer to your question. I think we're getting there, but there's still work to do. But I think we have to be realistic in what's feasible for the Army.
In the back, she gave CECOM question, what can industry do to help you?
Well, Chief Gaydon, I think so electronic patching is a good example. You know, we talked about RPS, but I think there's still a lot of work to do in terms of the whole big picture, right? What is the network that we're using to get there? How do we put that together? What are the packaging mechanisms outside of RPS? I mean, how are we going to make these patches take up less bandwidth? You know, what are all the different things that we need to do to try to make this effective? Certainly in the arena of software assurance, almost all of the tools that Xiomara's team is using are COTS tools. So, and you know, the threat changes all the time. So those tools need to be maintained. So, you know, what are the things that we need to do, industry needs to do, to continue evolving those tool sets so that we have the latest and greatest. Automation of everything is somewhere where I need a lot of help. We're rolling out test automation now. We're rolling out a DevOps environment now. Believe it or not, that was not at SEC a year ago. And so those are things also that continue to evolve. I don't want it to be stale, so I don't want to, you know, whatever we roll out, we're not wedded to, because we want to be able to maintain, you know, what industry is doing with software development at SEC. Those are some of the things that come to mind. Do you guys have other ideas?
So I think one thing that industry can do to help is, so those are, you know, great initiatives to look at, but when you bring solutions to us, help us understand how they integrate into the architecture, right? Because I think a lot of times industry brings great ideas, but we don't always know how to connect the dots, or we don't have time to connect the dots. So if you bring solutions, if you understand the architectures, if you understand the capabilities that we need and how they integrate, that would help greatly, because that'll reduce the amount of time, and it'll help us see the light quicker too, because we get briefed on a lot of technologies, a lot of solutions, but you don't always see the light, right? So if you can come with, this is how this integrates into the architecture, here's the net benefit you'll get out of this, that'll help, instead of just bringing what we'll call the shiny object to us. I think that would greatly help us.
So question, Christy from Iron, if you want to know about architecture like DevOps, I would go to DevSecOps, but there's so many different software that can connect into a DevOps environment, DevSecOps environment. You have to at least tell us what you're currently doing, and to leverage DevOps and automation, you have to go to a centralized pipeline. Most people, when I talk to them, they have, like my previous job was the DMVC, of Enterprise Service Director. We had over 26 major programs. They all had separate pipelines, and we couldn't control them, so we went to a centralized one. Then we could leverage DevOps and SecOps. But the people who came talk to me all had different solution sets. I didn't get anything from them until I told them this is what we have, and then they come and says, well, you can do A or B or C.
Right.
Because reality is a trade-off on what software. And if we don't know what you're using, we can't recommend an appropriate approach.
Yeah, that's fair. And I mean, we're more than happy to share what we're using. I think, Chad, in the end, I don't want to speak for you, but I think when you're saying integration, you really are talking about the tactical network. So as we look at electronic patching and how do we make that work across all these systems, that we need help understanding, how your tool would integrate into the overall tactical network architecture. On your DevOps comment, we today have how many closed restricted networks? Like 43 or something insane like that we are collapsing. Because yes, we recognize that we have to have some central, place where everybody can access these tools. So we have a lot of work to do at SEC, but I think we're on the right track.
So from a software assurance perspective, I think something that we could probably help, or we can use some help on from industry, is translating that data into information. On average, right now, the majority of the software code assessments that we do contains maybe 1 million lines of code or more. And generally, we can only really focus on the higher, the more critical findings to do the analysis on. So having an ability to actually do a full analysis of not just the critical, but just all of it, to be able to translate into information that that a system owner can leverage to actually take action would be a good path forward for us.
Follow on to that, what opportunities, or what is the best way for industry to share their ideas with SEC? The PEOs have their CFTs and there's different white paper opportunities. How does industry share with us?
So I've been thinking about, I knew somebody was going to ask me that question. So for now, I would tell you send us an email. I am trying to establish an office within SEC that we can have so that it's easier for industry to get in, so that they can look and see, kind of do a first assessment of where is the best place to send this, et cetera. But I haven't done that yet. So for now, send us an email.
And we've talked about the chief engineers, we get together at least monthly and we have these discussions, and we've talked about having an equivalent of like an industry day that some of the PEOs have, but we haven't done it yet because I want to make sure we focus those. So we say, here are the 5 topics that we want to discuss, not just everybody bring your ideas, because that gets overwhelming. Because I was at the PEO and we did those a couple times, and I don't think it was a good use of your time, nor was it ours. So I want to make sure we focus those. So as Ms. Zbozny said, we're looking at and we're trying to think through how to make those engagements easier.
Yeah, and we do obviously have a PBI every year, which we tell industry what we know. It's a snapshot, frankly, because things change, but what we know at that point in time we share. But I think you were asking more like off-cycle, if you have something you think can help us, how do you get in? Yes.
Could you provide more, insight on the processes that you use to determine the impact of patching the
Yeah, so basically it's testing. So, there is a group that looks at, I'll pick a system, I'll say WinT. So WinT has, I don't know, X number of different COTS products, and this month there might be 20 patches out there for those, those products holistically. So we patch the systems and then run the same tests we would run when we deliver a regular software release to see if there are issues. That's kind of the nutshell approach. I'm not sure, is your question based on you've had problems, or are you just curious?
Well, no, I'm actually glad that you asked me a question in response. No, so I'm coming from Europe, and basically the approach that they're taking out there is patch first instead of waiting for the patches. And based off of what I've seen and my experience in the past, is I haven't necessarily encountered a situation where those patches have an adverse reaction on the PMPOR systems, with the exception of Java. So I'm wondering if they, if that is a good practice, and if they should continue that.
So I did pull data about 6 months ago to see what products have we had habitual problems with and which we have not. Java is definitely one. There's more than just Java, though. There are definitely products, even sometimes Microsoft OS types of patches have affected, when you look at the big picture, not just maybe that system, but how that system communicates with other systems. But by and large, I would tell you you're right. So by and large, the problems are, we have less problems than certainly we used to when we started using this process. So I do think, and we are looking at ways to improve the process. Do we have to test everything? The tests are quick. We're not, and we are going towards automation, so they'll be even quicker. But, if you're saying maybe we could be patching daily if we didn't do the testing, that's probably true. And I think it's something for us to look at in terms of risk and reward to balance. But I think there's some products that are problematic to do that with. And so maybe we just do the others and not those. We are looking at ways to improve it.
Yeah, it makes sense to patch as frequently as possible.
Yeah.
But at the same time, these systems are still on the network, and the warfighter is going to use that system whether it's patched or not.
Absolutely.
But it's in our best interest to keep it up to date at all times. And we're going to patch the system, or at least me. I'm going to patch the system as best as I can, and even potentially federate that system with the domain that it's a part of.
Right.
So it'll probably be a part of the strategic domain. So it'll receive all of its updates through the RCC, and so it'll all be managed at the RCC.
Yeah.
And I'd rather keep it that way, because the less that I touch it,
Yeah.
I feel like the better it will be in terms of compliancy. And when you're talking about maintaining the certificate of networthiness, you at least know that that system is being maintained in accordance with the approving officials for that theater, with his or her blessing.
Yep. Yeah, it would be good to talk to you after just to understand your process. No, because it sounds like you're all over it. But I would tell you most are not. And so we find a lot of systems that haven't been patched in years. The problem we have right now with daily patching is the method of distribution, which is we're mailing CDs, right? So, daily patching isn't really effective when you're, mailing a CD to Afghanistan every day. So we are really trying to get after the electronic patching because it gets us much closer to being able to provide validated patches to do what you're doing today. It sounds like with unvalidated patches, but you're not having a problem. Okay. So test automation is our ticket to scaling up when we need to. I mean, as long as we're dependent on human operators and humans to set it up, we're limited, and we are. We are starting to roll out Eggplant is the tool that we selected after doing a kind of a bake-off of various tools. But like I said, that's part of our DevOps environment, but we're not going to let it become stale. It's not necessarily Eggplant for the next 10 years. It's, what do we go to next if there's more capability out there? So I think that is a place where industry can get involved. Actually in all cases for the DevOps tools, I nixed anything that was homegrown because I want to keep up with the times, and I don't want to pay to sustain it forever. So even if, when I get told, well, it's only really 2 people that we need to do to keep this current. Well, 2 people, the way I look at that, that's $400,000 a year. So how much am I going to spend on, commercial, and it gives me the ability to kind of turn left as industry iterates better tools out there, than if I commit to something homegrown that I can't. So, we're always looking for improvements in our DevOps environment, test automation being one component.
I had a question. I understood you say earlier that the COPS products and software solutions that are being provided give your office a lot of time, like them, perhaps them cleaning up a lot of your time. The current environment is pushing OTAs, DPAs, and other quick acquisition solutions where COPS are being highlighted, at every level.
I know.
Do you have plans or in the works to work with the network CFT and the others who are pushing these solutions to get better ahead of the curve? So you can interject maybe some perspective that they wouldn't have. And the second part of that is there a way where you can deal with industry as they work through these OTAs and DPAs, not your longer PM acquisition, so they can kind of get ahead of it versus continue to increase the workload of your office?
Yeah, so we are very closely working not just with the network CFTs, but with other CFTs that are going to provide products in our portfolio. I am well aware of the current trend towards COTS, and it's really, it starts with Congress, and so, that's certainly the direction in which the Army is going. Again, I'll use DSIGs as an example because they're like my poster child. So, they're caught up in all that, obviously, for their capability drops, and we are working very closely with them to help them assess the COTS products that they're choosing from so that we can make sure that we have the right support in place from whatever vendor ends up being the winner, and that we're thinking bigger than just that COTS product, because all of these COTS products are going to have to work within a larger network. So that's kind of our contribution right now to the process. I don't know what it's going to do to my workload. I don't, we'll cross that bridge when we really understand what these products are. But at a minimum, we have to have the right sustainment support and be thinking about data rights where it's not COTS. Obviously, data rights where it's COTS doesn't. That's like an oxymoron, but what kind of support are we buying up front from the vendor so that we can get competitive pricing? Because the worst thing we can do is commit, we're going to buy this widget, and then we talk sustainment later. Because, your bargaining power is out the window. So that needs to be part of the initial, the initial down select and the initial select. Yes.
Got another question.
All right.
I'm really glad that you brought up the topic of DevOps. And I know that you mentioned that you don't necessarily have to consult the PM once you receive the software. But what about, vice versa? So before you get the software from the PM, do you have any buy-in or say in the development of that code? Or
Mm-hmm.
do you have any interaction within that initial software development lifecycle?
We do. So we provide a lot of people to PM shops that they pay for to be kind of that, that entry to help the PM make the right decisions from the software perspective. We also we have requirements before we take software. So we have to make sure we work closely with the PMs to make sure that the software meets those requirements, that we have ATOs in place. We don't take software if there's not an ATO. You know, there's just some kind of basic things that we got to make sure are in place before we transition, because we're only allowed to spend OMA dollars on, you know, true sustainment, not enhancements. I got the high sign. I think that meant 5 more minutes. So I probably have time for one more question if there is. All right. I think thanks for your time. Appreciate you coming.
Let me say why.
Chad, how you doing? Greg Griffin. I don't know if you remember me. I was CSC back in
Oh, okay.
But look, I know you guys. You're not exactly taking it slowly building up to that.
No, I'm sorry. I'm going to let you talk to him for 1 second because our flight's been canceled. So I need to make a call here and see what I was going to get.
You need him or?
No, you can
So
talk to him.
actually, let's talk about electronic patching. We've been working on an idea. We actually built a demo in our room, so we've probably been canceled. Why don't you stop by? I have my chief architect there.
Not super fluid. Okay. Okay. Okay.
I will definitely.
Sure.
This is an industry-wide tool. Congratulations.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good. Thanks.
Chad, even if we have to go out of Atlanta,
Yeah. We'll figure it out.
this is terrible.
The compliance tool, so it's AVAR. I don't know if you've heard that. Yeah, we developed it in-house at SCC. No, it's not. And I'll tell you, that's not the end-all be-all. So it's you know, again, looking at the future e-patching tool and the compliance tool as well. And if it was all one tool set, that's better for us. So we have probably about a dozen systems that are currently tagged today. So
Hello.
CPOF, DSIGs, Tiger. I mean, I've got a list of them, but the tool's been actually around for a while. It just hasn't been matured and fielded yet.
Okay.
Yeah, no worries.
I don't know why I can't.
Okay. And you guys have a station set up?
Okay.
Yeah, so we were supposed to be leaving after this. We kept our flight down. Yeah, we're heading out today, but I definitely, and I'm just gonna write a, you have a
Okay.
pen? Yeah, I'm just gonna write a little note back
Okay.
here.
Okay. Cool. Thanks.
The capability that you guys have.
And is it just focused on cyber, offensive, defensive,
absolutely.
and then e-patching?
Sorry,
Or
our
patching?
flight's been canceled, so I'm
Okay.
trying to deal with trying to get us rebooked here.
I guess that's the domain of really using it, but it's
Sure.
Is it, do you guys,
Somewhere.
is the
Yeah.
focus?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the JTIS. Yeah.
There you go.
yes.
Okay, good.
Oh, okay.
You're
Okay.
welcome. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks. Appreciate it. Jason.
Okay. Perfect. All right, thanks.
You're really looking for combined compliance or something that's got it. It's kind of like what you're leaning on.
Well, so we look at, because we have to sustain the products, right? So we know C3T is looking at RPS, IWNS was looking at Puppet, right? So we were focused on those because we knew they were coming our way. Really, ASALT, they have the rose pinned on them to find what that future solution solution is. So we're helping, but it's really not our lane. We're just looking at what's coming in. So we are looking at Ansible as well. I mean, so we're open to whatever. We just know there's been a huge investment by CECOM into RPS, and again, that's a framework that they can build whatever functionality they want to. Right. But there are pros and cons to it, right? I mean, because then it's all Microsoft products. I mean.
Oh, I'm sorry, a card you said? Yes, I do. I thought you said a car, because I'm trying to figure out how we're getting where we're going.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. All right. Okay, great. Thanks.
I'm trying to get our flights canceled. So, and I'm not, I've texted my secretary, so for some reason I can't get her.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And that's exactly we don't just stop. We take it down. We do 45 days. TSA whatever. Right.
I'm not even sure which article you're talking about, to be honest with you. Is it SECs? Okay.
Forgive me, I came in.
Is it the one? Oh.
I got the brief via the website.
That's hard.
Right.
I kind of know what to say.
Okay. Oh, for people. Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, ACAS is the current standard.
That is to get help to roll out our DevOps. That's what we call it.
Okay.
Right. To try to help roll it out, train people, get it stood up.
Yeah. SCC, yeah, CECOM.
I mean, it's really a service.
On the back
it's
pretty
really a
much kind of
service.
goes a little bit deeper dive into
So I'm not sure.
Okay.
I guess you would
Okay.
with a company like ours, partner with you guys.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, so there's not a process that I'm aware of that's set up to do that. But I mean, if you shoot me an email, get on my calendar, we can
Sounds
certainly
good.
have this
All right.
discussion.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
So aside from the 5 gigawatts,
Hate traffic. Hate it. This is why.
Okay.
Hi, Dave.
we're not long.
Okay. Good. How are you?
I'm flying out of Atlanta.
I may be flying out of Atlanta. So.
But we came to talk to you about our DevOps process. I'll shoot you an email.
Okay.
Kind of give you more stuff I can say.
Okay. All right, perfect. Sounds
I
good.
mean, it's
Great
possible.
feedback.
We have 800 people. So.
Hey, how you doing? No worries.
I don't know if you remember me. I worked for EOEIS.
Okay.
I don't.
Oh, okay. I was somebody that works with
Okay.
time and Texas.
Okay.
Okay. Good. Yeah. All right. I remember now.
Talking about running
All right.
I live exactly this problem.
Right.
On G6, 9 to 10 over to Afghanistan.
That's okay.
Patching.
Yeah.
Command system.
So let me take your card.